Well, first of all, let me apologize. We had some technical difficulties last time. I'm glad most of you could make it back today. Um, this is Dave Monk, who's from ArcSource. He's going to be presenting disaster preparedness, as you all know. And thank you once again for understanding and showing up today. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Dave. Dave?
Great. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's great to be with everybody. I've been doing a series of webinars with the AIA East Bay in San Francisco last year and into this year, and I think the webinar venue is an awesome way to learn. It's a bit different than the in-person, in-office lunch and learn, but thank you, Mike and AIA East Bay, for hosting us today. I hope you'll get a lot out of the next hour. We're going to be talking about an interesting subject, disaster planning for architects. And this is actually a really popular webinar when I did it last summer. And we all have a new type of disaster in our businesses that we never thought of, which is the global pandemic. But I'm going to talk at a high level on disaster planning and preparedness and risk management. And then I'm also going to talk in a technology-oriented one, because really technology is what I'm about, and also really where a lot of the impact comes when we talk about business continuity. So if you have interest in checking out some of the past webinars we've done, you can visit my website, learn.arcsource.com, for more info. If you scroll down, you'll see a bunch of recordings on a variety of topics, from CAD BIM to working at home to project management tools, a lot of good stuff there. A little bit about myself. I'm a business owner. Like I said, I'm the CEO of ArcSource. I love technology. I used to work at William Turnbull's office, Turnbull Griffin Hoslip, in San Francisco back in the 90s. I studied architecture and engineering, and then about 22 years ago, I pivoted to work in IT. And so I've been helping architects with the intersection of IT and design and practice for the last 25 years. I've been an allied member of the AIA East Bay for many years. And more recently, I joined this really cool organization called the United States Secret Service Cybercrime Task Force. And no, I do not get to guard the presidents. That's what all my friends asked me when it showed up on my LinkedIn. It's a group of law enforcement and businesses and academics talking about modern cybercrime as it pertains to business in the Bay Area. So I've also been speaking on cybercrime and risk management on TV last year. And so I got the architecture background, the IT background, and the security background. So that's a really good combo. This is a group of my team at ArcSource waving hello to you from our home offices. We really focus on empowering architects with best-in-class technology so you can focus on making great buildings. We love to talk technology strategy, security infrastructure, and support. We're based in Berkeley, serving the East Bay and SF and Marin, and really the whole Bay Area. Typically, I start out these webinars with a discussion on IT trends, and I update this list every year. In fact, I just finished this list last week. And then, as you can see, I've layered over the top of it the red COVID-19. And really, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a big interrupt. Obviously, started last spring and continues now. Definitely excited about the progress that we're making with vaccines. But I've told my team, and most of my clients are thinking we're not out of the woods until July at the soonest, maybe into Q4 this year when normal would return. And so, like I alluded to at the very first slide, a global pandemic wasn't one of the disasters that we planned for, but it did have a big interrupt. And so really what I want to talk about today in framing disaster planning, and disaster sounds very ominous, really business continuity is everything. And I think that's a more constructive way to think about it. Disasters happen, yes. Business continuity is our goal when whatever happens, whether or not it's a natural disaster or a global pandemic or a technology disaster or some other ones. And so basically, a disaster shows up and our goal is to be business as usual. So I did want to also say that you guys can feel free to drop into the chat and ask questions. I know that we would be happy to answer questions as we go. So I will look for chat messages from time to time and stop to take questions. So again, business continuity, how do we keep business open as usual? What I want to talk through is really a bunch of ideas about business continuity and disasters. The first one is, how do we design our business to keep moving? And it's really important to think about as designers, we actually have the opportunity to design our business operations to keep moving. We want to make sure that we're maintaining our revenue, that we're delivering our services, that we're recovering our tools and systems in the event of a disaster, that we have access to our data and information, that we're supporting our team of employees, and that we have an ability to communicate. Lastly, we need to be adjusting our plans as we go. So my business plans for last year were thrown out the window on March 15th, and I had to come up with new plans. And the thing that was very exciting to me for myself and for all of my clients this last year is that we've all invented a bunch of new workflows and new offers. And the interesting thing there is that a lot of innovation has happened in the last year among my client base. I work with about 45 different architecture firms right now and have worked with over 300 firms in the last 20 plus years. Really have seen a lot of creativity and innovation this last year. If my client base is an indicator, we've definitely had some clients that are booming, a few of them that are struggling, but a lot of them have stayed steady. And I'm just, of course, very thankful and fortunate for that to be the case. So a lot of business continuity is really about uptime. How do we keep working when a disaster strikes? And even more than that, it's about data. And so the types of disasters that can come our way as small and medium businesses, the ones that really hurt us the most are where they steal our money, or where we lose access to our data and we cease the ability to continue to exist. And then it's about managing risk. And so disaster planning is all about risk management and risk planning and risk mitigation, okay? So that's how I think about it strategically. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is types of disasters, and there's a few: physical disasters, technology disasters, marketplace disasters, financial disasters, and what I would call people disasters. There's this disaster life cycle, which in the disaster planning businesses out there, it starts at the 9 o'clock position with preparedness, strategic preparedness. And that's a little bit about what this webinar today is about. And if this 1 hour that you spend this day, this week, this year is all that you do for disaster planning, I hope that you'll be better off for your investment of the time here. But if you were to spend 2 or 3 hours this week further thinking about this for yourself, or even better, 10 or 12 hours in the next month, you will be in a much better position strategically for your business. The other thing is that we need to not only prepare for disasters, we actually need to be strategic about how we plan for risk management. Not all disasters are equally likely, and not all risks are equally large. At the 3 o'clock position on the right side there, that's when we see how we respond when the disaster hits. And then the fourth step in the life cycle is the kind of strategic reconstruction and rebuilding and recovery after disaster, okay? So how we prepare, how we manage risk, how we react when something comes our way, disastrous, and then how we recover from it, okay? So a few physical disasters examples. I mean, I threw in a few images here. Earthquake is the classic one that the Bay Area thinks about a lot. This is the Oakland freeway collapse in 1989. Fire is another one. Knock on wood, I've never had any of my clients' buildings burned down in a fire. Flood, I have seen floods. I've seen sewage leaking on top of conference rooms, on top of servers, on top of desks. I've seen roof leaks. Theft is a real one. I've seen a lot of physical theft, both of the breaking into the office and also theft of laptops. I worked with a principal of a Berkeley architecture firm, and he had his laptop stolen outside of his car, or from his car, as he was parked outside of his house for 5 minutes, and we ended up having to recover him from that theft. Vehicle one is another one. Like I actually had a client that had a vehicle hit their building. So technology disasters is another category, and that's where I'm going to spend a lot of time, and especially as we look at strategies for managing and reducing technology risk. Hardware failure is certainly common. You know, the crash drive or the crash server, the crash laptop. Software failure is another one. System corruption happens. Hardware theft happens. Data theft happens, and cyber attack happens. So actually, the image here on the right of the screen is the neighbor across the hall from my company in my office building in Berkeley. We came in one morning on a Monday, and we saw this hole drilled in their front door, and the bad guys had come in and reached their arm through, unlocked it. They had no alarm, and for 4 hours, the security cameras showed them, the bad guys, carting out the servers, the desktops, the video production equipment. They were a movie studio, and all of their backups. And basically, the sad story is they went out of business because they were not able to recover from that hardware theft disaster. Okay. Another one that you're hearing a lot about in the news is a data breach. And cyber attack and data breach are often considered to be synonymous. I consider them slightly different. Cyber attacks are where bad guys are attacking your systems to steal your money or steal your data. A data breach is a specific kind of cyber attack where information is stolen that is private or protected information. So most architecture firms would not suffer data breaches, except for things like your HR, your payroll, or your employee information. Okay. So a lot of this is about data loss. And so if we look through all of those different types of technology disasters, data loss is at the root of our concerns, okay? And again, it's about risk. So how do we manage the risk to our business of these different disasters? And I would argue some of them are more likely than others, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And the cost for risk is going to be in the dozens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's where business continuity or business survival comes into play. Okay. So marketplace disasters or economy disasters, industry specific disasters. Competition is another marketplace issue. Reputation. If you have a situation where you get bad press, it can really impact your business. Relevance, if your area of service or your service offerings become irrelevant, that's a threat. And then intellectual property also. A lot of my clients have intellectual property, and they're also protecting their customers and their clients' intellectual property. So these areas are all outside of our control in many cases, but they are still a threat. Okay. And then the unexpected one this year that disrupted both the people and the market was the pandemic. So financial disasters is another category. Revenue loss, client loss. You know, these these could be out of the blue. You know, if you have your biggest client and they walk away for a totally relevant reason, that has a very negative impact on you. There's also loss of assets, which whether or not that's people assets or intellectual property. Fraud is a big one. So we've seen a big uptick in cyber fraud, scams, psychological tricks. If I've been seeing a lot of email attacks trying to convince people to give up gift cards as one. Another one is phishing. So phishing is a type of cyber attack where they trick you into giving up your username and password. And what they do in a phishing attack, once they have your username and password, they try to steal your money by logging into every bank in the world. They try to log into your email and steal your money by finding out your credit card numbers or your bank account information. Phishing is a very green field, and it's getting worse and worse. Ransomware is the other major cyber threat, which interestingly, again, is a financial disaster. I met with an architecture firm that had 2 offices, one in San Francisco and one in New York, right after they had a ransomware attack. And they had to pay $80,000 in ransom for San Francisco and $80,000 in ransom for New York, because all of their servers were encrypted by ransomware. So this, again, this is a big, big threat, both financially and operationally. It's one of the top 2. Really, phishing and ransomware, I think, are the top cyber threats that all of our businesses face, both large and small. And then lawsuits is the other financial disaster that I've seen come up from time to time for clients. Okay, so people disasters. There's the proverbial hit by a bus. What happens if the principal or the business owner gets hit by a bus? This actually happened to me 2 years ago. I was meeting with my team on disaster planning, just like we're talking about in this webinar. And we talked about what if Dave gets hit by a bus, and then 2 days later on my birthday, an AC Transit bus hit my car. Thankfully, I was okay. My car was not. It was not the worst disaster in the world, you know, medically or otherwise. But I couldn't help but laugh and cry, if you will, about the coincidence of that we had just been talking about this very unlikely scenario, and it actually happened to me. You just never know. There's other ones which are what I would call HR exposure, which are issues of hiring and firing or complaints of employees. These can turn into business threats. Staff loss, you mean someone that on your team moves on for various reasons. Human error is a big one, and we see this in IT and technology a lot. People make mistakes malevolently or benevolently. You know, yeah, Dave, I totally deleted the information. I meant to do so because I didn't think we needed it. Well, if that's the wrong information at the wrong time, it can be a disaster. Okay. Identity theft is another one, and this is also something that I dealt with last summer. I discovered that someone had stolen my social security number and name and had signed up for Comcast services in another city and another state. And then they sent me to collections because I hadn't been paying the bill. And they enjoyed 6 months of free internet, and I got the credit hit. So I had to go through the process of recovering from that. Okay. Again, business continuity is everything. And what that means next is disaster planning process. So I want to start with just opening up for questions. Do any of you guys have any questions about the disaster types before I go through the planning process? I'll just look in the chat bar here. Feel free to ask away. Nothing yet. So all right, so we are going to be recording this event, and so if you have an interest in seeing a recording, you'll certainly be able to email me and request the recording after. So now I want to pivot to a disaster planning process, and this is a framework. I tried to make it as simple as possible, and one of my gifts to you guys is if you signed up and attended today's webinar, I will email you my disaster planning worksheet, okay, which is based on this process here. So the first step is compiling all of your internal and external contact information that's important for business continuity. The second one is creating a communications plan. The third one is outlining all the key systems that you have and the data that you need to protect. The fourth one is super important, and this is perform a risk assessment for technology and other disasters. And then fifth one, really practical, you make a prioritize emergency action plan. And then sixth, you train your team. So if you were to work through the worksheet that I email you and or go through the steps that I'm outlining in the slides here, if you were to spend 2 or 3 hours on this, I think that you could then give your team a good update on disaster planning and business continuity at your next staff meeting, whenever that might be. Okay. So just a little bit more detail on each of these. Internal contacts, your leadership team, your staff, your family of staff, or at least the emergency contacts. You want to create an emergency team within your list of employees. So usually it would be one of the principals, maybe the office manager, and one other person that's willing to be on your emergency team. You want to know who your landlord is, your utility vendors and their contact information, IT services like ArcSource, insurance, legal, and lastly, any other vendors that are relevant. And the reason why you want to compile this information is because you want to have it at your fingertips when a disaster strikes. And especially if you have one of the worst kinds of disasters where you lose access to your information or you have a catastrophic loss of your building or your property, you won't have actually access to it directly. So keeping it in a separate place, in a binder, in a digital binder, in an email, on your phone, at your house, in a folder, any of these ways, you want to keep these contact lists in a few places. The next one is create a communication plan for when disaster strikes. You want to make sure you control your messaging. As a business owner, I highly recommend reassuring your staff and your clients and not panicking. You want to communicate with your leadership team. If you have several managers and principals in your office, you want to communicate to your full staff next, then your clients, then your vendors. And the reason why I step through in that order is that it really is most important that you get on the same page. And I find that this sequence is the best, most effective one for your company and for your clients. Okay. The other thing you want to do is make a list of all your key systems that you need to protect. And that includes things like servers, desktops, and laptops. We recommend backing up to the cloud all laptops and more desktops. Mobile devices, if you have them, email services, voice services, your phone system or your cloud phone system, other cloud services that you have, your accounting and HR data. You gotta have this documented separate from your own server and your own IT space. Okay. Website and marketing information, and then your core business applications. It's really important to compile a list of all your software and your serial numbers such that if you have a data loss or a data interruption or a server down, that you're able to access that information. Okay. And licensing. So now I would say this next slide here is the most important slide, or the next couple slides are the most important slide of this presentation. And a disaster risk assessment is a relatively simple framework, and I'm going to explain it to you now. The first step is list out all the types of possible disasters you think that they might have and their likelihood. So, for example, tornadoes are unlikely here in the Bay Area. Earthquakes are more likely. Pandemic, I would have given it still a low likelihood, but it's going to have a big impact, right? You definitely want to be thinking about non-catastrophic disasters. The building burning down is actually not going to be your biggest threat or your biggest risk. So you want to be thinking through the list of those people disasters and or the technology ones. Okay. The next thing you want to do is you want to rate the probability for each disaster that you have on a scale of 1 to 5. And you can spitball this in 5 seconds each. So for example, I would give the probability of a tornado as a 1. The probability of an earthquake, I would put, not 5. I would put it somewhere between 1 and 5. The next thing you want to do is you want to rate the impact for each of these disasters that you've come up with. So a server down would be a major impact, probably a 4 or a 5. Obviously, a building burning down or a fire would be a major impact. And then this is where it gets interesting. The risk equation is when you multiply probability times impact. So, and I'm going to have a table to show you on the next slide. This is where you're going to give a weighting to each of these possible situations or disaster scenarios, okay? So the level of risk you have is a function of probability times business impact, okay? Then the next step is sort your list that you make by high risk to low risk, and then start your emergency action plan for each of these scenarios, okay? And I would definitely, like I said, if you would spend 2 hours this week, you will really not regret it, and you would be way further along if you do this exercise this week. Okay, so here's an example of the table that I laid out. Earthquake, you can see I gave a likelihood of 2 and an impact of 4. I added the global pandemic down at the bottom there. A 2 likelihood and a 4 impact. A massive theft of your office, I think, is pretty low likely, but it's pretty high impact. But interestingly, you'll notice that the third one down there, the ransomware and phishing, it's very highly likely that you're going to face phishing and ransomware attacks on a weekly, daily, if not daily basis. And if it's successful, and I would argue it's a matter of when, not if, then the impact is going to be very high. And so what you're seeing here is that the highest risk that in these 6 examples is actually the ransomware and phishing. A server crash is somewhere in the middle. A tornado, again, is very unlikely. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Here's how you make your action plan. Okay, and again, I'm happy to send you my slide deck. So if you want to take furious notes, you're welcome to. But I'd be happy to share the slides, and you can look through them in a PDF form. Okay. The first thing you want to do, like we said before, is list these events or disasters by highest risk first. You want to really plan to take care of physical safety. Not every disaster has a physical component, but those that do, you gotta focus first on human safety. Okay, and then after you go from life safety, you go to physical protection, security. Okay, then after that, you go to staff communication. So a lot of times, if it's not a non-physical disaster, then staff communication is going to be your first step. Okay. Then you go to client communication, like I said before, and then you need to look at some financial adjustments. You need to ask the question, is there a financial impact from this disaster? Do I need to change my bank account passwords? Do I need to report my credit cards lost or stolen? Stuff like that. Do I need to talk to my insurance? And then you want to move into, again, if there's a loss of facilities, you need to look for temporary facilities and tools that you can use. We had a client in Oakland, gosh, it's been about 8 years ago. They came into the office and they discovered all of their computers were stolen, but not their server and not their backups. So we actually met them at the Apple store, and we went out and we set up new computers for them, within 2 days. I've seen other scenarios like that, including the one with my neighbor that I mentioned earlier, where they were not able to recover because they lost data. Okay, but if there is a situation where you lose facilities, you got to have a temporary solution, and then look at obtaining replacements, and then and only then do you start going back for your data. Okay, so if your server's down, you got to recover the system before you can restore the data. If your building burns down, you got to get the temporary facilities and tools before you can go about restoring your data. Okay. And then I highly, highly, highly recommend scanning all the key documents that you have, your leases, your shareholder agreements, your partnership agreements, your corporate constitution and bylaws, your bank account information. I highly recommend scanning those and keeping them in a secure cloud location that's not only in your office. Okay. And then really the one of the super moves for disaster planning is backing up everything. Okay. And that's of course a technology issue. So training your team, I recommend creating an emergency playbook for your team that outlines the action steps for different types of disasters. It's important to remember that planning is a continuous process. Again, if you spent 2 or 3 hours this week, you'd be way further down the line. If you spent 2 hours every quarter to review your disaster planning process and documents, you'd be way further along in a year's time. Okay, include everything we just talked about. I definitely recommend a quarterly review. That's about the right pace to think strategically about your business if there's any sorts of new disasters and new scenarios that are relevant. And then review it once a year with all of your employees is my recommendation. Okay. And then one other strategy, instead of having a big staff meeting focused on disaster planning once a year, is to just consider having it as a monthly theme in your monthly staff meeting with a little snippet. Okay. So the elements of effective risk management, and again, really, as I think about it, the top risks to architecture firms are going to be in the technology area, which are the ones we've outlined. Those are the things that are going to prevent you from being able to work and deliver services. The other one is going to be in loss of clients, right? So some architects were severely impacted with the COVID shutdown, some were not. And then the third most likely, I think, is the staff risk, right? So losing key staff in your firm. But when we talk about how to manage those top risks, the first one, again, is planning. And it's really important to have a multi-pronged strategy, especially as we talk about technology risk and managing that. You got to have a multi-pronged strategy to take care of both preventing and reacting to disasters. You got to have people lined up to do this. You got to have written process on how you handle stuff. You got to have tools in place to do it effectively. And you actually have to take some daily actions, especially in the area of technology threats and cyber risks. If you're not looking at your stuff daily, you're at risk, or you're at increased risk, I should say. Okay. And then regular reviews on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. If this kind of stuff sounds boring or mind-numbing or frustrating or scary, I would say I get it. It's kind of why the best way to take care of technology risk is really going to be around having someone do this for you as a practice, so that you can focus on designing great buildings and you don't have to focus on these things on the daily. You may not have the skill sets to do the stuff on the daily yourself. So I want to tell you a story about backup, and it starts with a story about my friend Scott, because several years ago, over 15 years ago, I had this idea that could write a book on business backup for small businesses. And he told me, and he was a publisher of a technology book at a big publisher, and he said, Dave, no one will ever buy a book on backup. And so this webinar is kind of actually my answer to his challenge, and the fact that we have more than a dozen people on here interested in this topic today. Really, like I said before, backup is one of the super strategies for managing risk and managing disasters. Okay, so the key thing here is that what Scott told me is that everybody is in denial about disaster planning. And again, the fact that you guys are here on this webinar is a great step. I really find that the denial is true. I've talked to some clients about it repeatedly. By these days, most of my clients that I've been working with for a long time are really well dialed in and protected. I'd like to say, but it's still it's not a pleasant topic, and we sometimes like to avoid it. Okay, so some of the things that we're seeing: 70% of businesses fail if you have a total data loss. And that is scary. My neighbor across the hall failed within 1 month of having a total data loss. The fact is, modern hard drives hold a lot more data than they used to. Also, the failure rate of backup tapes is 100%. The failure rate of hard disks is 100% if you let them go long enough. 60% of ArcSource's new clients have no automated backup. I met with a prospective client last week, and I discovered that they had not had a backup in 1,000 days. It literally said 997 days since last backup, and they were completely unaware of that. I met with another prospective client yesterday, and they had a mail server problem, and I said, well, your old mail server sitting over there is backed up really well, but your new mail server, which you've had for 2 years, has never been backed up once. And it was a disaster averted, but it was a scary situation. I would also share this, that 85% of our new clients are not backing up all the data that we think they should, which again is scary, because in my opinion, data is increasingly valuable, and if you're not backing up all of it, then you're going to miss it big time. Okay, and I would say 100% of our new clients need a refined approach. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of these I've mentioned before, but really I have dozens and dozens of stories of data loss that my clients have experienced. I mentioned the sewage leak earlier. I mentioned the hallway theft. I mentioned the laptop theft out of my client's car. Really, it's just everywhere. It's not an if, but a when you're going to have a data loss. And really, again, backup is the super answer. So timing is everything. Hardware failure is 39% of the cases of data loss. Human error is a whopping 30%. So the next one is a software problem. 8% is theft. Only 7% is a virus. Okay, and then a site disaster, and a site disaster is a catastrophic loss. That's only 3% of the scenarios. And if you look at this, 97% of the likely data loss scenarios have nothing to do with the fire or the flood or the earthquake. Okay, the cyber threats and the hardware and the human threats are the top threats. Okay, so there's two old questions that I used to ask: how much data are you willing to lose, and how long are you willing to be down? And back in the day, this was a function of daily and weekly backups. Old school backups were not backing up everything. They were only doing occasional full backups. They were doing weekly rotations of tapes or offsite, and only occasionally checking the system, right? There's a few assumptions there that are not good. One of them is that only servers have valuable data. That's not true. Another assumption, it's okay to lose all your operating systems and just protect your files. That's not true. That's the difference between being down for hours or minutes and or days. Another assumption is that if you just have a rotating backup that you take off site once a week, your embedded assumption there is that you're willing to lose 2 weeks of work, which is not a good assumption, and that you're okay to be down for quite a while. So in my opinion, everything has changed. Data is everywhere. It's more valuable than ever. Backup technologies has had a revolution. Costs are going down. Cyber threats are off the charts, and internet speed is going up. What this means is there are a bunch of new options and new technologies. So, like we're talking about, your data has a ton of value. It's not all equally valuable, but it is more valuable than ever. And the importance of protecting all your data cannot be emphasized enough. So I did some math a little while back, and basically, if you were a 5-person firm doing only a weekly backup, you could lose up to $24,000. If you're a 25-person firm doing only a weekly backup, you could lose over $100,000. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter the size of a firm you are. If you have 2 computers ransomed with ransomware virus, you could lose over $100,000 nowadays. Okay, bigger firms, the losses mount up big time. And the reason why you think about it is that productivity, your firm-wide billable rate is really large, and a large firm is, earning, well over $2,500 an hour. Okay, so when we talk about business continuity and when a disaster strikes, the 2 key questions are how much lost data and how much downtime do you want? And my answer is I don't want any lost data. I want 0 lost data, and I want to reduce downtime from days or weeks to minutes if I can. Okay, so my approach to designing backup says that you should have 4 elements: hardware, software, people, and process. There's always going to be a weak link. You can never plan on set it and forget it. Okay, so if I want to talk to you guys about what I see as the keys to successful backup strategy, the number 1 thing is to get out of denial and face reality. Get started right away. Rank your critical data. You definitely want to separate your backup functionality and your archive. Backup is what you need in order to recover from a data loss. Archiving function is what you need to have to protect your data forever. I'll say Dropbox.com is not a backup. It is a copy. Google Drive is not a backup. OneDrive is not a backup. Okay, you need to have a backup strategy that is automated, reportable, and manageable. Okay. The other thing is that you want to make sure that you have people that are managing your backup locations. You want to have hardware on site and off site destinations. You want to have people checking every single day. You want to be performing test restores to make sure your backup system really works. And you want to make sure that you're updating the software and documenting it regularly. Okay, so let's see. I want to talk about 3 different strategies that we recommend. One of them is backing up to the cloud, and I recommend a cloud backup for everything like a laptop or a desktop. I also recommend cloud backup for the server, but cloud backup is not enough. And like I said, Dropbox is not a backup. You need to understand there's a ton of options out there in this space. The ones that we like are from Backblaze, Carbonite, and Mozy. Datto is a new player, and they have a new technology, which if I was to throw my laptop into the bay here, I could virtualize my entire laptop within minutes in the cloud. So the files only backup option is moving into the old days now. Okay, but backing up to the cloud is very important to protect against the 3% scenario, and also to protect against mobile data, which is living on laptops. Okay. The other thing that you want to do is back up of the cloud. It's no longer okay to think that Microsoft Office 365 and Google G Suite have your back. They only have your back for 30 days for user mistakes and administrative mistakes. Okay, so we can't rely on people, and therefore we recommend a cloud-to-cloud backup for G Suite and Office 365. We also recommend backing up your website data to another cloud provider. We recommend backing up your cloud accounting services to another provider. And we also recommend backing up your Autodesk BIM 360 models to another location. You cannot rely on one cloud provider to be there, even though companies like Google and Microsoft and Autodesk are highly well run. Any questions in the chat? Looks like not. Okay. The next one is business continuity and disaster recovery appliance. So this is what we're recommending for any firm that is 5 people or larger, and any firm that has a server. In order to have business continuity, what we recommend is hardware backup on site and cloud backup for the 3% scenario. So 97% of the time we're going to use the on-site backup. And we're no longer using tape at all. We haven't used tape in over 10 years at ArcSource. We're no longer using rotating hard drives. That is not enough. And cloud-only backups are not enough for a firm of any size over 5 people. So this Datto technology that we recommend, it takes a snapshot of your server every hour. It stores the data on site and in the cloud. And in the case of your building burning down, it can bring up your server, resurrect it back to life in the cloud. Or if you have a hardware crash on site, you can bring it up on site on these appliances. Okay. So those are the power strategies. One of them is backing up to the cloud for desktops and laptops. Another one is backing up of the cloud, your Office 365 and Google information, most importantly. And then thirdly is this hybrid cloud on-site and off-site disaster protection. Okay, so at this point, I'm actually at my second to last slide, but I want to zoom out and I want to talk about risk. So again, if we think for architecture firms, and I'm looking across the dozens of clients that I currently work with and the couple 300 that I've worked with over the years, the top risks that I've seen for business continuity and business survival are technology risks. Second of all, they are client risks, losing business. And third of all, people risk, losing people. Okay. So I am not talking a lot about client risk and people risk today. I'm really talking about the technology risk. Obviously, that's my specialty. But what we are finding is that technology underlies and undercuts almost all the other areas of risk. Okay, so my second gift to you guys is, if you would like, I'd be happy to do a free backup system assessment for you, where we compile a list of your data sources and what backup technologies you're using, and then make some recommendations. And I would happily give you a risk assessment in the backup space. Okay, so Who has questions? And I would love it if people would unmute themselves. I will stop sharing my screen. If you'd like to speak out a question out loud, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. I hope this has been a valuable use of your time and that you've learned a lot. Again, disaster planning sounds ominous. To me, business continuity and business survival is strategic. It's the key to how I can take care of my family and my employees' family and my clients, right? So that's why I'm so focused on this. And really protecting data and information is one of the most important things that I do. So who has any questions? Or you can type questions in the chat, certainly. It's going to be a quiet crowd.
Could you give us your contact information?
Yeah, sure. I do have a slide for that, and I will share my screen again. It's dave@arcsource.net is my email address. There you go. Again, I'm very happy to be a resource to the AIA East Bay community. I have been for a long time. A lot of people, a couple people on this call are my clients, but most of you are not. My clients, you know, I'm talking about with this stuff with them all the time. But for those of you that are new to me, again, happy to follow up and have a discussion with you afterwards. Any questions though? I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Sometimes there's tons of questions. Sometimes there's none. So if there's not any more questions, I guess we will go ahead and wrap up today's webinar at this point. Thank you again so much for coming. Thank you to the AIA East Bay for hosting us, and I really hope that you guys benefited from the last hour, and I hope that you can think strategically about how you can plan for your business continuity and how you can both be prepared and ready to respond to anything that comes your way. Again, you know, COVID-19 was a crazy year for us all, and none of us really expected the dynamics. I'm, you know, definitely proud of all of my clients and, you know, all the architecture firms that I work with for how they've pivoted so creatively this year. So was there a question? Let's see. Oh, yeah. To prevent losing staff on the monthly, quarterly meetings, what type of questions should we look for? Okay. So if you're talking about mitigating against staff loss, to me, it comes down to culture and asking what's working and what's not working, both from each employee's perspective and about the company and for their own job. To me, I saw this great talk once at a business conference, and it said the #1 driver of profits ends up being leadership, and right after that is happy employees. And so finding out what motivates our employees and what's working well for them, what's not working well for them, and helping them solve their problems. That's what makes happy long-term employees. And then there's actually a typo in my email there in the chat. It's there's no H in ArcSource. So all right. So if there's no more questions, let's go ahead and wrap it up here. Again, thank you for your time. I hope you had a great lunch hour, and I'm going to go eat my lunch, and I'll see you guys soon. Look for calendar updates from AIA East Bay for other webinars that we're going to be doing up and coming. Okay.